Was cool.
Good morning. Welcome to this week's edition of the mandatory Monday morning briefing. We have a great guest and good program for you today. We certainly gather with mixed feelings today. Pennsylvania happy to have the return of the Stanley Cup, but saddened by the broader national context of what happened in Orlando, and all those who were impacted by that are in our thoughts and prayers. We will start this morning with first introducing our guest here, and I'll introduce to you our guest speaker, but Mr. Brown, if you can start.
Fred Brown, the Motorcycle Industry Council.
Sharon Roth with First Energy.
Anna McCausland, Americans for Prosperity.
Dave Thompson, Medical Society.
Stephanie Caterino Wisman, API.
And who's with us online?
Online we have Brandon Richards, Craig Tucker from Pennsylvania Bio, former Senator Earl Baker, Eileen Anderson from SMC Business Councils, Gail Landis from the Greater Reading Chamber, Janet Ingalls Van Dyne, PPK Animal Health, Joel Rotz, Pennsylvania Farm Bureau, Jonathan Humma from Commonwealth Foundation, Judy Eschberger from JAE Government Relations, Margaret Durkin from the Bravo Group, Mary Keenan from Weber Associates, Mary Weber from Weber Associates, Maura Donnelly from PMA, Michelle Leslie, Range Resources, Paula Knudsen, PA News Media Association, Peter Calcara, PICPA, Rosalie Adams, Pennsylvania Business Council, and John Kennedy, Pennsylvania Business Council.
Excellent. Thank you all. On the topic of being online, let me thank our sponsors who make it possible for you to be online: UGI Utilities, Buchanan Ingersoll and Rooney, Range Resources, and Exelon Generation. We appreciate all of you and your sponsorship. Thank you very much. Our guest this morning is Representative Jeff Pyle, who represents the 60th State House District. That's parts of Armstrong, Butler, and Indiana counties. Jeff was first elected in 2004. He was a teacher at the time of his election, had taught in the Armstrong School District, in fact, from 1992 to 2004, time of his election. Very successful teacher there, and also ran the Leo Club group, the High School Lions Club group, that, believe it or not, was the largest in the country.
Largest in
the world. I'm sorry, largest in the world. And they're in Ford City in Armstrong County.
Started with 3 and ended up with 188.
188, that had to be half of the graduating, more,
It
about the
was,
graduating class.
yeah, it was about 3 classes actually, but they were very active.
Jeff is on the Appropriations Committee.
Yes.
He is also on the Environmental Resources and Energy Committee and the Transportation Committee. We're going to talk about a little bit of all that, but
Sure.
Representative Pyle, thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate being here. Been looking forward to it. Room full of friendly people, and you know, you told me ahead of time. Let's talk about some things that matter local. Right now, back home, the most prominent thing is happening in our employment sectors. Armstrong, Indiana, and Butler County, the 60th, is a treasure chest of minerals, gases, standing timber. You name it, we have it. Deep coal, deep gas, shallow gas, minerals, aggregates, sand, cement, the whole 9 yards. A full 33 to 40% of Armstrong's employment is in energy, electrical generation, discovery, exploration, whatnot. Over the last few years, our coal jobs have really taken it on the chin. Our big producer is Rosebud, who has always stood ahead of the curve in energy production for a lot of different aspects: how well they treated their men, how productive they were, great safety records, all of that. And now we're dealing with over 1,000 men without work because the coal demand just isn't there. So you have to ask yourself, who were they selling to? Mainly electrical generation. Our area is blessed with a number of power plants. The one they shut down about a year ago, Armstrong Station at Reestale, was one of the smaller ones that it was not economically feasible to go retrofit billions and billions and billions of custom-built scrubbers to make it compatible with the amount of electricity it would have produced. That was 300 men. We get word last week that one of the big, and this is something Pennsylvania should make note, one of the very big base plants, Keystone at Shilakta, is scaling back its production also. And every time we hear it's a matter of non-compliance with the Clean Air Act, we all scratch our head and say, doesn't a man making a fair wage and feeding his family and keeping his kids coming up right, where does that factor into the equation? It's been tough. We're blessed with abundant gas reserves, both conventional and our new friends, the Marcellus and Utica shale drillers. We are the traditional gas field. You know, Armstrong and Indiana, between them, host nearly 30,000 shallow wells. That's the stuff that does give people living in rural areas free heat. That's the stuff that does pay the small royalty over a long course of time, but it's also the stuff you don't have to process and evaporate and condense and separate. That's the stuff that goes straight into people's furnaces. Now in Harrisburg, and just last week, it kind of hit a boiling point. The Chapter 78 versus Chapter 78A regulations. Chapter 78's overseen oil and gas production in Pennsylvania since the early 90s. Marcellus Shale, of course, being much more recent of a discovery than that, the administration decided they needed a whole new set of rules, and there was a little bit of skullduggery going on in how those rules were formulated that would eventually lead to the resignation of DEP Secretary Quigley, and it's not done yet. You know, we're still banging them out, and you're dealing with two different things. But again, we can get into the philosophy and theory of it all, but really our perspective is jobs, jobs, jobs. And every time we see another regulation comes down, it's more jobs that are in danger. You know, Halliburton left Indiana, 435 jobs. We are very dependent on the energy sector to be able to make it work for us. Now, the flip side to that is we proudly say we light and heat the entire East Coast. And if they would let us go back to doing what we do well, we would go back to doing that and turn Pennsylvania into an exporter of electricity again. What a lot of people are not aware, Pennsylvania's electrical fleet generates annually roughly 12 to 12.5 gigawatts of electricity. It's enough to make everybody's air conditioner come on when it's hot. It's enough to carry the load, but no longer do we have that buffer that we can sell. I know for fact when we catch those super deep cold snaps, vortexes, I know a couple of years ago, speaking to the speaker at the time, Sam Smith, who was very adept with energy, he told me point blank, one of those nights we were 8 minutes away from rolling brownouts. And at -10, do you want to take the chance rolling the dice at being the winner or loser over whose furnace works and whose doesn't? It's not conscionable to me. We need to go back to what we know how to do, which is bring it up, make it work, and benefit everybody else. That's kind of the big Armstrong Butler, Indiana news right now. Other big news, we're very excited about the reopening of the locks on the Allegheny River. A lot of people are unaware of this, but a few years ago, two pieces of legislation ran in the Transportation Committee that made this possible. One was public-private partnerships, and I got to give a shout out to Rick Geist, who's in Altoona right now. The guy worked 4 or 5 years on this. And whenever I talk to him now, I tell him that was his Moses bill. You know, he got it passed, but he couldn't walk into the promised land with it. He retired. That and the transportation bill created a multimodal fund which acknowledged Pennsylvania is more than roads and railroads. Water is valid travel. And in our case, we had Army Corps of Engineer locks stretching the length of the Allegheny River, which bisects my county perfectly in two. It runs right down the middle of it. Locks 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Well, Lock 6 picks up at the Allegheny County border. Lock 9 is at the Clarion border. When federal budget cuts a few years ago negated their ability to put money into operation of the locks, we formed a public-private partnership with the Army Corps. First one they had ever taken part in. Essentially, we put up the cost of retired lock tenders to operate those things on weekends. We pay them union scale, union bennies, all of that, so they need no further retraining. And in return, Fridays through Sundays, May through September, our locks are open. Now, it's more than just recreation. We know for fact every summer those locks are open. Armstrong County's tourism goes up $400,000 to $500,000, which is money we don't have to tax people, and that's a very good thing. And as a kid that grew up on the river, it's just not natural to me that we can't move up and down. You know,
And with the functioning locks, it's navigable from Pittsburgh to.
it's
to
navigable
Ford City.
the whole way from Pittsburgh up to East Brady. The Allegheny offers an awful lot for boaters. As a lot of people are aware, the Allegheny and the Mon form the Ohio at Pittsburgh. The Mon is still a very industrialized river. And if you're ever water skiing and don't pay attention and see a barge coming up on you, that's going to ruin your day. With the closure of Reestale, Armstrong Station at Reestale, and with environmental dictates negating our ability to pull up the aggregates in Lock 6, which the Army Corps tells us is a 200-year supply. Unfortunately, there's mussels mixed in there with the gravel and the sand, and 100 more jobs, laborers that work the dredge boats are no longer there. We live in a blessed area. Just let us do what we do. I mean, last week we had a big discussion in energy about the 78 and 78A regulations, and to listen to the opposing thought, one would assume Armstrong and Butler and Indiana are just a giant patch of scorched earth, just a wasteland, bubbling ooze and green soup for streams. And it's not like that. It's not like that at all. It's beautiful. They call us sportsman's paradise. I could show you pictures of deer grazing, leaning with their rack up against collection wells. And there's a reason they have the Bass Masters in Katanning, and it's not because the Allegheny's some toxic wasteland. I wish people quit thinking that. We have a very vibrant outdoor culture, both in energy resource recovery and in recreation, and it's a really good dynamic, and we feel good about it. We just wish people let us keep our jobs.
Well, Jeff, let me start things off. First of all, great to see you. Thank you for being here. We appreciate your leadership on so many things. Want to get specific
Sure.
on what happened with the bait and switch on the regs for deep well
Right.
drilling, and then the administration
Yeah.
included the conventional wells,
Yeah.
and then tried to get that through ERC as though the regs had been that way all along.
That was, to use, for lack of a better phrase, they threw a spitball.
Yeah.
Marcellus being such a unique thing and so vastly different than a conventional well, we recognized the need for regs. The problem was our directive to the executive branch was go back and form out a new set of regs for just
Right.
Marcellus. They did not do that. They took the old conventional regs, beefed them up, and said, okay, this is good for conventional and this is good for shale, which, you know, I would tell you it's an apples and oranges comparison, but it's more like apples and elephants. One, you're going, you know, conventional well, you're drilling down about 400 feet and tapping an underground dome full of gas. Shale well, you're going down, in my area, 5,600 feet and turning sideways and breaking solid rock and harvesting gas from
It's
that.
10 Washington monuments below the ground.
Oh yeah, it's more than a mile, and we're one of the shallower areas. We're blessed to have not only Marcellus but Utica, and there's some Upper Devonians down there. We really haven't fleshed out. We could be doing this for a very long time. What former Secretary Quigley and his guys did is I don't think they consulted ERC or DEP. I think they just went into a room, cooked up what they thought should be, and said this is what it's going to be. They took it to ERC, told them to vote for it. I understand there was some parliamentary gymnastics at ERC that day. Moving previous questions and all kinds of that silly stuff you see on the House floor. And we caught them.
Yeah. And I guess my point here is that it was an act of extreme bad faith.
Oh, yeah. Agreed. Agreed. They were given a task. The directives were clear. They just, my opinion, I think they ignored it and had an idea what they wanted to do walking into the room.
Well, and this takes us to what we're seeing at the national level, which is comparable
Yeah.
to this. And you
Agreed.
have the president's power plan rule, and that has been pushed very aggressively, and that now you have the Wolf administration saying that even in the face of a stay from the U.S. Supreme Court, that we in Harrisburg
They're
are
gonna move ahead.
gonna insist on deploying this, and the General Assembly is pushing back on this.
Yes.
Where does that stand?
Let me give you a real quick background. What you're referring to is the Alternative Energy Portfolio Standard, which has been law for a while. One of the things that the federal EPA was found negligent with was they did not do a very vital component in any rule promulgating, which is doing an economic impact study on small business. They totally ignored all of it. No regard for existing energy. We're seeing more and more promulgated rules serving in place of legislatively passed law, and that gets my dander up. That gets me going. Who can I yell at EPA for making us shut down Armstrong Station, and then 3 weeks later the court stayed the whole thing? That's 300 guys for 3 weeks that didn't get a paycheck. Who at EPA made this rule? Show me a picture. Now, that's different than somebody who's elected. When you're elected, you stand scrutiny. In my case, every 730 days, 2 years. I am term limited 700 days. But these guys, you don't know who they are. And then they all hide behind that aegis of EPA. And, thank you for driving our unemployment up 3% in about a month. It's ridiculous. And if you want to get into APS, on its face value, in some places it has value. In places that are exposed to constant wind, like a shore, like I know when everybody runs down to the beach for a week in the summer, every one of those little restaurants has the little mini turbine going on the roof. That's fine. It's a constant wind source. We don't have that here. Okay, we could go into solar. Passive collection photovoltaic is smart. We power our space stations with it. But Pittsburgh has 54 days of sunshine a year, and of that 54, it's even lesser that's considered harvestable sunlight for solar panel generation. Let's get into the cost. If we generate a megawatt using coal, it's going to cost us about 16 bucks. If we generate a megawatt using gas, it's roughly the same, okay? Nuclear is actually a little cheaper than that. Solar panel goes off at 72 bucks a megawatt. Wind is a little bit less, it's like 68, 69. That has to reflect in the consumer's bills. Why is this a good idea? We're going to go from consistent, cheap, reliable to sporadic, occasional, and more expensive. Not smart. And that's the kind of stuff I have to rail against.
Well, I was just remarking, I told you this before we start, but coming in today, listening to satellite radio station I listen to. They always do this day in history kind of thing. This day in history in 1977, Jimmy Carter gave a speech to the American people saying how we got to get rid of our dependency on oil by turning more to coal. And we really got to get more of that coal out of the ground because that's our real ticket to the future.
Absolute,
So,
absolute.
At some
agree.
point, Washington had a different point of view than it has today.
Well, they're doing some really neat things, and everybody's concerned about particulate counts and whatnot. But you haven't. I don't even know if they're still around. Coalstar, which was a Swiss conglomerate that was looking real hard at our county, and those guys take coal, process it into aviation grade fuel. It was originally an Air Force project out of Colorado Springs. How about that? Not only can we power cars from, gas, CNG, big trucks, LNG, we could do it with coal.
Anna?
On follow-up on Dave's question with the Clean Power Plan role, Quigley, a couple days before he left, had said that they're no longer going to be trying to roll out a state implementation plan until the Supreme Court makes a decision. I'm wondering if you, as chairman, have heard anything more, depending on who the next secretary, I guess, would be, if that's how the DEP is going to continue. And also thoughts on Senator White's bill. I think it's Senate Bill 1195.
Clean coal bill.
Right, that would change the dates, I guess, on the implementation plan.
This probably isn't going to be what you want to hear, but I'm going to give you another question. Who knows what DEP is going to do? And you nailed it yourself, bait and switch. I've seen that come out of this department a few times. I like to lay back and wait until I see the product they're putting up there before we start cutting into it. The Supreme Court ruled that EPA was negligent in doing their small business economic studies. If you listen to the proponents of AEPS, they're telling us, well, it's just a delay. It's going forward. We're not so sure. I think there's a lot left unsaid here that needs to be fully fleshed out. You get into windmills, and they hate it when I have these talks with people. But you could put up a wind farm with 30 windmills, and you'll have 30 windmills that never pay for themselves. They wear out before they produce enough electricity to pay off their note. Solar, did I mention 55 days of sunshine in Pittsburgh? Now, that's not to say Erie, which has a totally different wind and weather pattern. It may work for them. Here in South Central, on the windward side or the leeward side of the mountains, the mountains knock down a lot of clouds. You may be able to make it work out here, but I will tell you point blank, there is no way on God's green acres solar's going to work in Western Pennsylvania. We just don't have the fuel source. So we are dependent on what we have.
No, I was gonna say in the category of good news, and we got some. That God be praised that Royal Dutch Shell lit the green light that they're going to invest $4 billion.
Very excited.
And hire thousands upon thousands of tradesmen to build a petrochemical facility to turn ethane into ethylene. Ethylene is the precursor
propylene,
of
all those good.
every kind of paint, glaze, solvent, adhesive, coating, rubber, plastic, styrofoam that goes into every kind of consumer good that you and I purchase and handle and use every day. It's tremendously exciting. And so my question is, obviously this is not a one and done. How do we, as people in the state policy arena, work to optimize conditions for growth so we can get the maximum amount of value added and jobs out of this opportunity?
Yeah, you're talking about the Royal Dutch Shell cracker plant in Beaver County. Very exciting news, because now that directly addresses a problem we've been having in Armstrong, Butler, and Indiana. We have so much gas that our reservoirs are full. We need to get that gas out of there, and if we can take it straight up to Beaver into the trunk line, better for us. You'd be silly to have that value just slip out of your hands. So what's happening when the reservoirs are full and we don't have pipelines done, they'll just close the valves. And with the closure of the valves comes a closure of royalties to the landholder that holds it. You know, comes a closure of making payroll, you know, for the company making the whole. We're very excited about Beaver, and the numbers we're hearing are 6,000 construction job for the next 5 years, 600 permanently at the plant. And that's not counting the spin-off peripherals.
No, the downstream, I mean, if you're making plastic
Right.
resin, you know, in Pennsylvania again, like we used to, you know, you go up to Erie then, Erie, Cleveland area was where it was really the hotbed of the
Petro.
plastics industry.
Yeah.
So you had Plastec that's still going strong up there. Unfortunately, Erie Plastics closed. But then you get the tool and die guys who make the molds for the plastic. I mean, there's so
a
many
lot
down.
of spin-off.
Yeah.
And those things, and again, if we do this right, we can see that activity come back. And I'm sorry, I stepped in. The boss wanted to ask a question here.
If we're finished with energy,
Sure.
I'd like to get your perspective on the liquor bill. I was shocked that that bill went through. I thought it was more or less dead. But is this really doing anything? I mean, for example, we hear 4 bottles of wine can be bought in restaurants, but they have to be uncorked. And what's your take on the movement of the liquor?
Well, you just gave me an out there, Mr. Anton, movement. That's what we're looking at. It's not, the job's not done, is the end of the sentence. But this is a step in the right direction. At the day's end of what we do, we got to give the people what they want. You know, and I've heard dozens and dozens and dozens of people say, I'm making this tonight, why do I got to go to the state store for a bottle of wine? And I can't answer. It's a very good point. About the bottles being open, that's going to make the bottle aisle a lot of fun up at Shop and Save, but yeah, that's going to be different. I'm one of those guys that just feels the state shouldn't be in the liquor business. You know, us in Utah, you know, I'm nothing against Utah. But, you know, there's prosperity hiding in there. And somebody is going to capitalize and say, I want to be the guy that does this business. And he's going to invest a lot of money, or she is going to invest a lot of money. And that money is going to go towards hiring people and paying rent or putting up new buildings, which is going to generate revenue for the state and give people the convenience of getting the wine they want. And that's a winner. That's a winner. I don't have a problem with buying wine or beer in supermarkets or convenience stores. I went to school in West Virginia. That's old hat to us. Hard liquor, we'll talk about that. I don't want to walk into Shop and Save and see some kid that just had a slumber party with my 17-year-old daughter on the living room floor selling me a bottle of bourbon, you know. That part I have a problem with, but we can work around that. What's really important about that bill, convenience, you know, that's it, convenience. You know, now we can go get Pennsylvania wines. My wife loves Pennsylvania wine. She doesn't like the fancy stuff. Why shouldn't...
Lucky man.
I tell you, yeah, she likes them sweet. I'm like, you want me to put some Sprite in there or something? Yeah, she's not a bourbon drinker, thank God. But it's a step in the right direction. You know, we got to get beer done and give the people what they want.
Another question.
Go ahead.
Personal question.
Yes, sir.
What did you teach in high school? And tell us about this program that went from
Oh.
3 to 180.
I was a social studies teacher. I taught history and sociology, and when you're in social studies, you're certified in 6 areas: psych, sociology, history, all of that. And how it all started was I got transferred back to my hometown, you know, where I went to school. And when I got back home, it wasn't anything like I'd left. You know, garbage laying around and things just being left to fall apart. What I noticed from the young people was the one commonality they all had is they wanted respect. And I told them that's something you earn. They don't just give it to you. And they said, well, how do we do it? Well, right about that time, Congressman Murtha had landed a Forestry Service grant, enough to pay for 130 trees on our Rails to Trails section, and my borough kind of mishandled it. And we had all these trees sitting in a fenced-in yard for months. And I went to him and said, hey, how about you let me and my kids put that in there? We'll go dig up, well, we didn't know it was an old rail bed you had to break with a pick and a mattock, you know, I mean, it was tough. So I put a piece of paper on the door and said, I'll give you a hot dog and a t-shirt if you show up and help me plant trees, and 130 of them did. And they're all still there. Haven't lost a one.
The trees or the kids?
No. Well, I had to pass them after that, Dave, but I made sure they could spell. No, it showed them a valuable life lesson that you shouldn't expect values like respect to be given freely. You got to go out and earn that. And I always made a point when I had the kids out either planting trees or going door to door on an energy assistance program, cleaning up all the playgrounds and parks. I always made sure I invited adults to sit there and look at these kids, you know, breaking a sweat, picking up sticks, painting curbs. And they did it all on the promise of a letter. I'll write you a nice letter that'll help you get into college. And it was very successful. We started with 3. We ended up being 188. And originally, it was only 11th and 12th grade. I was trying to get the kids' resumes beefed up. And parents of like 8th and 9th graders started approaching me going, come on, open it up to younger kids, open them like, so we did, and out of the blue, we were the biggest in the world. Yeah, it's one, next time you're up on the hill and I'll have you over to the office, I have a t-shirt hanging there. Fort City High Leo Club, 99 to 04, 20,000 volunteer hours. Yeah, they did everything. Read to kids at the library, candy striped at the hospital, shoveled sidewalks for the elderly. You know, every year we would go out in April and clean up all the parks and freshen up all the yellow curbs. And the kids liked it.
Well, and I just civic capital.
Yes.
Civic capital, and you know, it's easy to overlook or it's easy to mock and dismiss, but you know, what the Kiwanis and the Rotarians and the Lions Club and the Knights of Columbus and all of those community organizations serving others, and especially when you have that mentorship for young people, like the Lions with the Leo. I was a key clubber when I was in high school with the Kiwanis. That those kinds of things that you know, that give especially young people the chance to give back to their community, to actually for the first time in their lives to be part of civic life. It's just exceedingly important.
Just, you know, 2 thoughts, and then I'll give it up to you guys. 130 trees in the ground. And that was October 17th, 1998. Not a single one of them has been damaged. Not a single one. The theory behind that, kind of an offshoot of Rudy Giuliani's broken windows. For every kid that puts a tree in the ground, that's 2 that's not going to mess with it. It's the kid that put it in that said, hey, I did that, don't you touch it. And since then, the trees became benches, became overhead shelters with picnic tables, trash cans, little boxes for people to clean up after their dog,
Yep.
flower boxes,
Yep.
broken windows, just like
Yep.
Giuliani said. You know, you stop the broken windows, you instill pride and sense of ownership. You got a good thing going on.
And I can give you 180 degrees from that I was visiting my family in Delaware, and we were at the Christiana Mall, and that there was some punk kid who tossed down a packet of mustard and like tromped on it.
Oh,
Just to
cool
be
guy.
a jackass.
Cool
And it's
guy.
like, that kid needs slapped upside the head and sent off to a boot camp somewhere.
Okay.
And it's like again, idle hands at the devil's workshop.
Yes.
No respect for the fact that you've got this beautiful marble palace here that you had the privilege of going to, spending time. It's like, you know, again, you gotta drill that into it.
I gotta tell you this because it just blinked back. That was such a cool experience. One of the groups of kids, my hometown is small. There's only about 3,000 people, but we have 35 identifiable ethnic groups, and they all came because of the Great Factory, the big PPG
Yeah,
glass
we should say,
plant.
so Ford City, which is not a city, it's a borough,
Yeah,
was founded as a company town by PPG.
correct.
It's named after the founder of PPG.
John Ford.
John Ford.
One of the cool things a group of the older kids did is they wanted to put a little vignette together that documented some of this ethnic history, and it was really cool. You know, one Saturday we'd go to Dorothy Slavensky, who's very proud of her Polish heritage, and she'd have her whole dining room laid out with, you know, nesting dolls and wooden plates, and I have on tape her and 4 or 5 of my kids sitting there making butter lambs. You know, and then the next week we'd go to the Ukrainian church, and the Ukrainians would teach them how to make pierogi, which is not pierogies for my Mrs. T friends. For the Ukrainians, it's pierogi. And it was really cool. Out of this little 10-minute movie they put together, a guy who formerly worked for Barbara Bush in the White House, his name's Don Maines, heard about this movie. And he said, "Can I see it?" And I took it over to his house, and he watched it. And they used that to go after federal funds to rebuild the PPG. And they were successful. So, yeah, my kids, they did good, you know. And now, you know, years later, they're doctors and they're lawyers and they're engineers and drillers and welders. And I see them out walking the trail. And every one of them does the same thing. You see them walking at a regular pace, and then it slows a little bit. And then it picks up again, and you know that's the tree they planted.
Yeah.
They're checking on their tree. It's pretty cool.
You have a question from the web, and then,
Eileen Anderson from SMC Business Councils asks, will pension reform legislation be taken up this week in the House, and what do you see as the outcome?
We are told it will be. We are told it will be, and it's really hard to predict because you never know what's coming out of the woodwork at the last minute. Everybody knows it's needed. We have to do it. Pension's the driving force. You know, right after payroll, pension is the driving force in every school district budget. And when you lump them together, it's undeniable and overwhelming. You know, unlike most parents, I've a junior in high school and one that's a freshman up Penn State right now. We want the best quality we can get, but we want it in an intelligent, efficient way. Okay, we don't want to be paying for rock climbing walls and magic erase boards when a piece of chalk and a slate works just fine. Will it be taken up this week? We are told it will be, but this is like the 3rd week we've been told. Okay, I'm kind of chomping at the bit. Let's get at it.
Jeff.
Hi.
Thank
Hi,
you for
Steph.
being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. Question for you, switching gears to state budget process.
Sure.
June 30th, deadline is looming, as we all know. From your perspective, what are your observations on how the process is going so far?
I'm glad you're seated. I'm much more optimistic this year, and this is the part where you hold on. We might be done on time. We are being, you know, and being on appropriations, we meet every day, 2-3 times a day. just because everything changes so quickly. It's better to have an angle on the ebb and flow instead of just looking at one set. We're told our approach people started much earlier this year than we did. We're already agreed on a vast amount of the budget. We're down to like 2 or 3 lines. One of them, of course, is education. The governor wants more money, more money, more money. And some of that money that we anticipate is coming from freeing the wine is part of that equation. I mean, we're seeing 150 to 160 million coming out of that. Let's use it to kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
So you're not expecting a suicide run this time?
I know I'm not doing a suicide run this time, but look, this is not hard. If Joe and Susie, Pennsylvania, have X in their checking account, and they sit down to pay the bills, they can't spend X plus 1. Okay, the bank's going to bounce checks and not be honored. I feel the Commonwealth has to conduct itself the same way.
Yes, sir.
When we have, and we're pretty good with our revenue projections. We're seeing it, to be more direct, we're seeing it come out around 31.8, 31.9, somewhere in that range. It matches revenues. If there were an increase in revenue, and I'm not saying we're voting for taxes because that's not going to happen, but if we can generate more revenue, it moves the chains. I don't. Let me repeat that. I don't see another prolonged shootout like last year. I just don't.
Go ahead, Fred.
Yes, sir.
Do you have an election opponent, and how are you dealing with the Trump phenomenon?
Oh, wow. Trump carried our air. Trump did something none of us had ever seen. He had 2 opponents and took every county. That's impressive. That's putting it on the ground and making it work. As far as a phenomena, I think more than anything, my people where I live are by nature conservative. We're so fed up with this guy in the White House right now. If you could teach a cow to walk backward, we'd probably vote for it. But Trump represents departure from this heavy-handed Washington Beltway government laying down the law. I think Trump is going to let business do what business does. You know, businesses aren't there for free. They're there to make a profit. You know, I don't see that the government has a right to have its hand in the pocket of every business. And I think that's kind of what the current POTUS has established. And I think Trump is a sea change from that. He's 180 degrees, flank speed, and full ahead. And, you know, my wife and I talk about this. Probably my biggest beef with the current POTUS is he doesn't even try to work with the elective body. He doesn't. He just gets up there and promulgates a rule that says this is how it's going to be. And until there's a lawsuit to challenge it, that stands as law. And I think that's the wrong way. It's the wrong way to do things. Thomas Jefferson said representative government exists only by consent of the governed. And I don't remember any of my coal miners or electrical workers or gas drillers or stone dredgers consenting to give up their jobs because we had a endangered mussel that may or may not be there. I think Trump's going to sift through that. I think Trump is going to get down into the rule promulgators and just tell them point blank, enough funny business. I mean, I'll be honest with you, Mr. Anton, 90% of my headaches come from dealing with rules that didn't come out of the legislature. I'll give you an example. Armstrong's very rugged, very hilly. A few years ago, when it rains real hard, we get flash floods in our creeks. One of those flash floods was Glade Run. Now, sitting on Glade Run is an old church that shut down 4 or 5 years ago because the parishioners dwindled and everybody moved to another church. So the pastor who was at that church bought the structure. And that was going to be his retirement, turn it into his house. Okay, and he did a real nice job. Rains come up, water comes up, Glade Run washes dirt off the foundation of his house. For 4 days, this 90-year-old pastor had Glade Run literally running through his basement. So they find the crack in the foundation. He calls a cement guy. He says, "Can you come pour cement against my wall to seal this crack and get Glade Run out of my basement?" The cement guy applied for a permit and was told, "No, you're not allowed to do that." And when we ask why, "You're in an endangered bat zone."
How would the concrete in the basement affect the bats?
It was an endangered bat zone, and for you questioning that, you're a bad human being. That's how they play, Dave.
Yeah.
In the back cave.
Well, anyway, I ended up getting directly involved in calling Fish and Boat and Game Commission, and I said, "Look, you're going to show me a bat, or I'm going to go pour cement on this guy's wall." You know who it was? It was Jerry Stern's uncle. So they understood I was a bit perturbed. Boom. Next day, no bats. I'm like, wow, imagine that. Sight of Jeff Pyle in a cement truck just scared the living hell out of them.
An opponent? Do you have an opponent?
We don't really know yet. There's a kid that wanted to run, and he popped up at the last. He was one of the governor's recruits, and I hope you don't think I'm a bad person, but to get on the ballot, you need 300 write-ins from the party that's going to be listed next to your name. In the 60th district, there were a total of 309. So it would seem the kid made it. 157 of them were mine. He wasn't. I got more Democrat write-ins than their guy did. But he still thinks he's going to be on the ballot. So.
Is it in court?
Huh?
Is it in court?
No.
Okay.
No. I don't.
How about the last election before this one? Did you have an opponent?
I've had opponents every time except this one and the last one. Yeah, a couple years ago, I was the only guy in the West. So they threw the kitchen sink at me.
And what did you win by?
They got 34. I'd bump it right now with you if I could. No, it's, Mr. Anton, I'm out in it all the time. I've never been home on a Saturday. There's always a church function or a Little League game or something. And for me to know how to do my job properly, I have to know what everybody's thinking. And to do that, I got to be out with them. My job is to do what they want me to do, not what I want to do.
That's either perpetual service or a perpetual campaign, one or the other, and they're both the same to some degree.
I don't really campaign a whole lot. I just work. Send me what you got. Let's bang it out. I've got one going on right now for a fella. Little things. Guy's an Iraqi war medic. He wants his license plate from PennDOT. He sent it in 3 weeks ago. Why isn't it here yet? I'll get it. Stuff like that. Freeport, Borough. Couldn't afford to buy a whole new ambulance, but they had a really cool thing where they could take the big specialized cube off the back and put it on a new frame, and then they ran into problem transferring it from Ohio into Pennsylvania where they built the thing. So I drove out here and got PennDOT straight, took the license plate, drove it home.
When are you running for Congress?
No,
When are you running for the United States Senate?
No,
Congress.
I like
Who's
my
your
guy,
congressman?
Mike Kelly. come on, you know, I love Mike.
When Mike becomes governor, the seat will be open.
I told Mike when he runs for governor and wins, I want to be the secretary of something. We haven't decided yet.
DEP secretary could be open, yeah.
I don't think they're going to
You don't
let
think
that.
Well, yeah, and I don't want to bring this conversation down, but I was going to say, you've also never run away from tough issues.
No.
And so one of the things that's bound to come up this week now, because it's the way public policy works, is more discussion about guns in light of Orlando.
Right.
You're a staunch Second Amendment
I
person.
am.
You know, what's the, because we can't be flippant, you can't be insensitive,
No.
but what's the response, the intellectual response to talking about, having a constructive conversation about guns?
The
in America?
assault weapon, address the assault weapon.
Sure. First of all, what they're calling an assault weapon is a mistake. They're calling semi-automatic firearms assault weapons. I got a shotgun that holds 3. By their definition, it's an assault weapon. I'll be honest with you. It takes a good guy with a gun to stop a bad guy with a gun. I am deeply, deeply saddened by what happened in Orlando or the Amish schoolhouse in Lancaster. Any of them. What they all bear in common is people that had known mental issues that were identified by the systems, but the systems did nothing. This guy most recently, and I don't like using their names because I feel that's exactly what they want. They want the fame, and it's not fame, it's infamy. It's their names should never be spoken again.
The killer.
Yeah, murderer. Do I feel that gun control would have fixed it? Absolutely not. Not a chance. Guns are inanimate, no different than your car. I own a number of guns. None of them have ever walked themselves down the street. Either I carried them or they did nothing. They are incapable of acting by themselves. Now people will go, well, you know, guns are meant for one thing, killing. I got a 17-year-old. A bunch of my buddies with kids the same age feel the same thing about cars, which kill a heck of a lot more people. And if you want to get into the details, there's a very loose number, and I won't quote it, that will show you more people die from falling off of ladders and into bathtubs than are killed by a gun. The commonality there being they're all inanimate and depend on the action of a person. Until we can get into the actions of the people, we can't talk about gun control. We can't. We saw how successful it was in Ireland, where when all the law-abiding people gave up their guns, only the IRA had guns. The people that didn't obey the law, and that's what would happen here. If we ask people to lay down their arms, the ones who obey this law will be the ones who didn't go to jail, but the ones who didn't lay them down and who broke the law would be the safer ones. And that would be just irony.
Well, and here's what feeds the Trump phenomenon. This mass murderer in Florida was an employee of a contractor for the Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah.
This person had visitations twice from the FBI about terror ties, about jihadism, and yet
radical Islam.
Yeah, and so how is it possible that the very federal agency that is supposed to protect us from these kinds of mad dog killers has them on the payroll?
I just used the word irony, but that's the one that's banging around inside my head. I think there was a tremendous failure, and I think people looked the other way at the very, very wrong time. The Tsarnaevs in Boston are here on student visas. They blow up marathons and hurt people and kill people. This joker in Florida worked for DHS. His co-workers reported them to their superiors. This guy's talking all glamorizing suicide bombers. The light should be going off.
And the same
You would
thing with
like to
four
see
good
the
sugars.
goodness in their heart, but you were so wrong that it cost, no, assume nothing. Assume nothing. We had issue out in Pittsburgh with bringing the Syrians in, and everybody's still concerned. I mean, my cousin is part Syrian. She's never shot anybody up or poisoned water wells or any of that. She's a sweetheart. Why, if we weren't concerned, did Mayor Peduto order extra patrols in his neighborhood and no others? I think that speaks loudly.
I do want to take this down to a more somber note. So what's the upbeat note to finish on? What do you say? You've given us some good news.
Budget's close, man.
Budget's close.
It is close.
Pension's close.
That one, not so sure. I know budget's moving along well.
We got some modernization, although we need more with liquor.
We need more, yeah. I mean, let's free the beer. You know, we got wine cut loose. Let's get beer out. You got to give the people what they want.
Right. And the locks are open, so come to Armstrong County.
Come to Armstrong County. Got a great concert season planned right in the beautiful Murtha Amphitheater, right in Katanning. Seats about 4,000. There's some big name acts coming up. Celtic Women, Buckwheat Zydeco, the Clarks, which are a huge Pittsburgh band. That's the one. That's the one I like to tell people to come to, because you'll see 5,000 people on the banks of the river, and you could literally walk across the boat decks, because there's 1,000 boats on the water, and they're all spending money in Katanning.
Excellent.
We like that.
Well, thank you very much for being with us.
Oh,
Jim Pyle.
pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
Great to see you, man. Great to see
And again, I want to say thank you to those who sponsored the webcast, so you can see him from your office: Buchanan, Ingersoll and Rooney, UGI Utilities, Exelon Generation, and Range Resources. Next week, Representative Part Wentling is going to be in. He's going to be talking about workforce development. And then on the 27th, Representative Eli Venkovich talking about the manufacturer's caucus. Thank you to Dave Taylor, Fred Anton, and everyone here at PMA, and we will see you next week.